Welcome everyone. Hi, I'm Christopher and I'm thrilled to have you at our Amplify the Brand live stream series where we build powerful brands in today's digital age. So along with my fellow friend and colleague there and branding expert Samoa, we are here to help you share the expertise and help you take your brand to the next level. So whether you're an entrepreneur, a business owner, a marketing professional, or someone who's tinkering with the idea of getting a personal brand off the ground, this live stream is packed with practical insights and strategies that will help you amplify your brand and stand out in that digital landscape. So please get ready to take some notes, put what we take into action. And because of this, we're obviously looking at ways to build a clear roadmap for you to take a brand that truly resonates with your target audience. So thanks for joining us today. And let's find another way to amplify your brand. And we're going to do that by talking about the topic of the brand evolution. So it's really about recognizing the signs that you need a rebrand. A rebrand can be a powerful tool. It can refresh your image. It can connect with your new target audiences. It can stay relevant. And it's obviously something that helps you with consistently evolving markets that you play in. And I thought, seeing as this topic is quite topical, because a well-known person in our lives and in branding has done something quite, I guess, I don't have words for it. It's just something that you just don't do, but he seems to be doing it. So do you want to talk about this particular scenario, Sim, and just give us a way to kick off this live stream?
Of course. So if you're not living under a rock, today, by now, you will have seen, heard, or have come across the latest rebrand in today's day and age of social media. Of course, we're talking about the very, I will use the word polemic, rebrand that Elon Musk recently put out with his infamous platform, Twitter. Now, it is not our place today, nor the time, to judge if it was a right or a wrong decision, or express loyalty to or away from Elon Musk himself. What we're trying to focus on today is the fact of the rebrand event and how he went about it. So many people are talking about how the new logo does not express the values of the company, and it completely breaks with the legacy that it built up to this point. While on the other end of the spectrum, there are many people celebrating for the exact same reason. So this is why we decided to make today's live session about the rebranding process and kick things off with the Twitter example. So Elon Musk is known for not giving a tweet speak or a bird's beak about what people think. He has a knack for predicting the future, and usually it takes a few years for the world to catch up. So, like I said, Twitter's new approach to the symbol, to the ambassador of the brand, which is the logo, has created a lot of ruckus online and offline, and everybody's talking about it. And while we can waste hours and hours talking about the technical execution of the logo itself, we're going to leave that for another day in place. We're going to just focus on the legacy and the decision that this this move is provoking, and the waves that will ripple from this. Yeah. My 2 cents. The association that the brand Twitter had been known for over the last few years, like I said, has been the reason why there are people celebrating about the new direction, and there are people crying or not aligning with the previous direction that is clearly interrupted at that point. That association was built, and it's a very it's a very clear milestone that Elon Musk is setting on the ground right now. He's putting a flag on the ground and standing right next to it and saying, I'm cutting with the association that we've built thus far. And there will be people who can't align. I happen to know a coach who's very, very successful on Twitter, and he basically decommitted from using that platform anymore because he doesn't align. As far as branding goes, right now, I have a couple of questions, and this is what we are doing today. So the X mark for the Twitter brand is a very different approach and a very different visual to what was up until now. And again, not putting charge negatively or positively around that, we're gonna talk about the things that will be moving forward. And my questions right now have to do basically to what's going to happen with the integration with other brands that Elon Musk has under the X. What's going to happen to the activities that the brand and the touch points that the brand had with the public up until now? What will happen to threads? What will happen to tweets? What will happen to the outer nerve endings that the brand had with the public moving from here on out? So this is the introduction to today's rebranding topic. Chris, back to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we will talk today through what we have in our program, which is obviously a P8 system. And today we're actually really talking about positioning when we come to rebranding, because when you're in a position to rebrand, you're really looking at repositioning yourself in a market or a target audience's mind. So we have this P8 system set up in a way that so that it is systematically going to build a framework that allows you to know why you're going to do what you do at certain points in your brand's evolution. And these steps will identify the opportunities that will provide you to decide where you want your brand to go. So if you want to look at doing that and you're not sure where to start or where to go, please reach out to us and have a chat about our P8 program and the framework that supports it. And it may be the ideal scenario for us to work with you and help you reposition your brand. But what we're going to do today is go into the next steps of what that's all about. And it's like the why you would do it, when you do it, and obviously how you would go about it, rebranding. And the first thing we usually look at when we do this is looking at an outdated visual identity. So sometimes your logo and your colors and the overall brand design looks a bit old-fashioned and it doesn't resonate with the modern consumer, and it's time to consider maybe a rebrand that appears more current and appealing. We are going to talk about some great examples of this at the later part of the episode, the big brands that have done that. But I guess let's talk about why this comes about, because it's actually the most common reason we work with people is that they've started a business. They these days would have gone to Fiverr or some kind of logo creator. Maybe their next door neighbor's son is got some graphic skills and they've got them to do it. And they started the business and the business grew and they started getting more business. But the things started to be tiring and they're just like noticing that the logo probably isn't as modern as it could be. Or many brands had a brand that they kicked off in the noughties, and then all of a sudden this thing called social media kicked on, and all of a sudden things became square. And they needed the logo into a square so that they could be seen socially. So these are some examples. I guess, Sim, what's your thoughts on it when it comes to this kind
I agree with everything you said. Basically, the online digital landscape has forced a lot of rebrands to look at their visual stance and how they adapt to that landscape. And we can also use the term outdated visual identity with inappropriate or amateur or no longer serving. So that's the grounds for us talking about the visual identity, because it's the foremost visual part of the brand that reflects itself to the audience. And in terms of digital, please consider, everybody watching this, please consider that we interpret the world via this device nowadays. 80% of everything that we consume and interact with happens on this screen or a slightly bigger screen, which means that everything from your colors, the contrasts, the font usage that you have chosen or had chosen for you, and all the way up to the logo mark may or may not serve you any longer. And that is a sign you need to consider a rebrand. On to number 2.
Exactly. Well, actually, I'll just quickly identify the fact that we've started with that because that's the most common reason people think a brand needs to be changed. We have talked about in previous episodes that your brand is not the logo. The logo and everything we've just talked about is only one aspect of your brand, but it is a very common reason you need to move on with your brand and look at a rebranding of it. But it's not the only reason, and that's why we're going to work through all these next steps that we have identified. So one of the next steps that we look at when we're developing a opportunity to rebrand is when you have a declining in the market share or the sales of your business. So it's experiencing a slump in sales and losing ground to a competitor. And a rebrand can help reposition your brand and regain the market relevance. We've had plenty of situations like this where we've worked with clients that we had the project management client that we worked with recently, where she went through exactly what we talked about in step one, but she was really clear on where she was with her moving forward. And so we were able to develop a brand that attracted those corporate clients, or the peer-to-peer type clients that she was hoping to approach and target. And this was a way for her to, even though she had all this experience and she was in the industry, that logo gave her a whole new reason to just revisit some old connections, relationships, and do it with more confidence.
Absolutely. And this is a flow on from point number one. Just picking right where number one left off. It's many a times the case where a trend, or when people start a business and they go for the quick fix solution of going to those platforms that we've mentioned and create a symbol to represent the brand. There was a space and time back then where they might have been an underlying trend or commonality to everything that was being done at the graphic level. So those trends flowing on to today may or may have not, probably may have not, served the brand any longer. And with this particular client, we obviously had to look at her message and her position in the market and see where the gap was between the audience and her positioning, and help her bring that gap to a close and represent her in a visual way that made sense to everybody in her ideal space.
Yeah, and this is one of those rare situations where she absolutely loved that direction. She's so proud of that, and she just gas bags it to everyone about how awesome her brand is. But it wasn't just because she loved it, it's actually the reception of the people she was working with also loved it. So it achieved its goal of her feeling good about it, and also the people that were receiving the branding, and the way she communicated was also helping her do what she was trying to achieve. So declining markets is another reason for this to happen. Sometimes it's this one, which is a mismatch with your target audience. So if your brand is no longer aligned with the preference and values of your target audience, maybe a rebrand can help you realign with your image and the messaging to connect with them better. Now, this is pretty common with either technology companies or companies that maybe jumped on a trend, and that trend changed, or they picked a particular demographic that maybe it was Generation X, for example, and they have matured. So maybe when you were targeting them, they were teenagers or mid-20 types, and then all of a sudden now they're family orientated and they're doing things. Or baby boomers is another example of that, where there was ways you used to communicate to them, but now because they're all retiring and traveling and doing a whole bunch of things at that end of the lifestyle cycle, you're changing the way you promote and market to them. So there's some good examples, I guess, and you've probably got some other ways to look at that.
I'm just going to complement what you said. It is commonly the case where initial logos focus too much on a product or a service, and as the brand evolves and that product finds its positioning or irrelevance to position, it becomes more and more apparent that the logo no longer reflects what it meant to do. And this goes back to the purpose of a logo design, which is not to talk about a product or a service in itself, but to represent a brand and visually identify it. Once you have done that, it's up to the rest of the visual identity to do the heavy lifting for the brand, while it explains visually what the services are about, how it brings the product to market, all of those things. And there may be that alignment or not with the target audience. Now, what happens many times is that people keep doing research or learn by mistakes. This process of learning by mistakes brings them to the conclusion that they need to slightly refine their position as far as the service and the product. And then the visual identity is basically a matter of keeping up to it.
Yeah, that's right. And again, we're not talking about the fact that it's just visuals. It could be the way you're communicating or where you're positioning your brand in the sense of where you're placing it. It might change as well. So as I used with the baby boomers, you would have potentially gone for certain aspects of that, how you kind of targeted them, to now looking at caravan magazines, retirement magazines, or websites, or whatever the case be, is where you would be targeting now, where previously you might have been looking at parenting websites and things where they were evolving as parents who were looking after kids, right? And if you go back even further, when they were teenagers, there would have been Top of the Pops or whatever it is, whatever the kids are watching these days. Obviously, we've got Spotify and a bunch of other things like that these days that you would use to target them in that way. So, yeah. So, look, that is number 3, leading into number 4. And this is something that I guess touches on what we touched on earlier with the negative brand perception. So if your brand is facing a reputational issue or a negative public perception, a rebrand can serve as a refresh start and help build trust in your consumers. And I think the Elon Musk is sort of, we don't know the real reasons why X has become, why he did what he did, but this seems to be part of it, is he felt that that little bird wasn't serving its purpose anymore. It was a negative icon for all the things that Twitter wasn't doing well.
Absolutely. That's precisely what is very interesting and to keep our eyes on in the case of Twitter, because we've already lost our minds and the internet has created many opinions. The funny thing is that this is not even the first hour of existence of the new baby. So moving forward is what will determine the new direction. But we've seen an intention behind that direction, is that, and that is what we are trying to focus on. The perception that Twitter had among its users and among the general public and media, and some cases in court, because there have been people taken to court over making decisions from the organization that Twitter was, led to the negative, or the perception being charged one way or the other. Again, I'm not trying to show bias. It may be inevitable to me in my case, but that's absolutely fine, that people don't agree with. And the situation with Twitter is that Elon Musk felt that the last 3 years don't represent the brand, and he decided to put his foot on the ground and set a new direction. Now, like I said, we're seconds into the life of the new direction. So let's see what happens to everything. We've seen a few things thus far. He mass fired people inside who he felt didn't align with the culture and the values of the company. That's a sign. He absolutely is revolutionizing their position in the market and not afraid to show it either, which is very different from the position that Mark Zuckerberg, for example, tried to do, which was aesthetically distract the public from an innermost, deeper problem within the organization. So even though Elon Musk risks potential implosion, he is not afraid to go and do what he needs to do to clean up house, or in his perspective, do what's best for the future of the company. And this takes us back to the perception. All this cycle goes back to how he feels and thinks that the future perception of the company will be affected by either continuing or interrupting that perception up to this point.
Yeah. And what's different about what Elon Musk has done with this is there's lots of things, but one of the clear ones is visually doing with an X. So that X is creating a situation where it doesn't scream tweet, which is one of the things that Twitter is known for. So saying X and tweet sort of there's a misconnection there. That's one aspect that just clearly stands out. But apart from that one, the other one is that the X at the moment, he hasn't gone about trying to explain why it means something to the consumer that is using his product, where normally what a brand does when they do this kind of rebranding is they have a whole campaign and it's strategically set out, and you get little teasers in the lead up to it. And then obviously when they do it, they launch with some kind of thing that communicates why a brand went the direction it went.
And that's part of why this could be either considered a stroke of genius or an absolute raw approach of cutting the meat, separating and ripping it by hand. Elon Musk has no lack of resources. So he could have gone the route of producing tweezers, creating an introduction and phasing it over time, saying something is coming, blah, blah, blah. Watch this space, keep your eyes peeled. But no, overnight, he put up a brand that exploded the airways in the internet, and created immediate ripples. So is it that bad, or is it actually the the best way, a la Elon Musk, that he could have done about introducing the new logo?
He did give us some warning sign. There was a tweet, by the way, where he told everyone, I'm going into a meeting to look at the new logo. If I love it, it's going live tonight. So he did tell us.
I missed that. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
But as I said, normally people give us like a timeline, and there's sort of, I don't know, it's weeks of planning, months of planning. It's like a big thing. It's not, I'm literally going to go into a meeting right now, and by this evening, you
and
might
if I like it, it's going live.
So again, just crazy how we went about it. So now the next thing is you have an expanding products or services. So if you're expanding into a new area or an offer or a wide range of products and services, a rebrand can reflect this growth and avoid the confusion amongst your customers. Now, it just coming back to what we just talked about, that could be the ultimate goal of what Elon Musk is doing. He just hasn't communicated it very clearly to us. And so we're still confused as to why he's doing what he's doing, where many other brands would not do what he's doing, and they would actually do everything we talked about, which is they would just softly lead into how they came about it, why they did what they did. And look, we've seen rebranding of banks and a whole bunch of brands that just are terrible.
Yeah.
Like they're just totally off the mark and just not great. But internally they had a reason for doing it, and they communicated that, and then it was up to us to interpret it. Some of those brands have survived. Some brands now were proven right in their direction, that rebranding did everything it was supposed to, and they have, by doing that, repositioned themselves successfully over a period of time. And then there's others that have had to go back to their origins and just basically go, okay, we got it wrong. Here's the logo. We're back where we started.
Yes. Yeah. Now that you mentioned it, on the last sentence, a couple of those "let's turn back," let's backtrack what we did. Examples just came to mind. And yes, you're absolutely correct with your evaluation of how a rebrand serves the purpose of reflecting the change in products and services. We talked about this in point number 3, and it comes up again. So again, it just goes back to understanding that when you fine-tune your position, your expression of it should also be updated. And what you were very sure 2 days ago, or last week, or last month, or even 2 years ago, may not be the case anymore today. And it may be an effort, but it's the best effort you can make to keep connecting with your audience. And this is a part that we're going to touch again in a future point. But connection to the audience is very important. Not losing the ability for the audience to understand that you've come in a journey and you're willing to keep them updated on it. And that's what I'll leave it at for right now.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. And we will get into some examples later on. But another one that leads from this is the merger and acquisition. So sometimes, and obviously some of these are relevant for bigger companies, but even as a small business, you may go through this where you might partner with somebody, and that leads to where you are now. So after a merger or acquisition, a rebrand can be necessary to integrate the two companies and their cohesive brands that represent the new entity. We've seen a number of examples of this over the years where a merger has happened, and you will see this come together. Again, it can be, depending on how they approach it. I think it depends on the branding. And when I'm talking about branding in this case, sometimes the visual branding, the logos can merge and create something wonderful. But many times what happens is that they have to actually just ditch that history and go with a whole new identity, because the merging created something new. It was like when mummy and daddy met and they created a new baby. It sort of, that's what happened. So, and sometimes it's a mad scientist that has created the new entity. So you've got to be really, really careful when you go about this, when you're merging and the acquisition, because what's interesting about that merger and acquisition approach is that sometimes you're inheriting their negative energy or their positive energy. And this is another thing that comes out of that process, is that when you're doing this, be mindful of who are you merging with and what is it going to create. Because we have talked about this in other series where your brand has to be true and have integrity about it, because as soon as you show any, it's faking it to make it. You just bought that company just to get that goodwill. You may lose a whole bunch of credibility because the goodwill that came from that customer audience you bought don't believe in your new values, where you're going, and you just lose them all anyway. So you've got to be mindful of how you go about that when you're looking at that. The next step in this is you've got a shift in company values or mission. So if your brand has undergone a significant change in its values, purpose, or mission, a rebrand can communicate these updates to customers and stakeholders. This is also another very common reason we have worked with businesses, is that they've recognized that maybe the reasons why they started the business have evolved, and they are now seeing that because sometimes businesses go into business with an ideal client they want to attract, and for some reason, out of their own, they just can't control it, that they attract a certain type of business. And what they do is they align themselves and realize, well, we've got this far and everyone loves us, but there's actually a whole market there that we could go further with. We've just got to look at either the way our visuals look, the way we communicate better. Maybe we need to update our photography. We need to put ourselves in different places, but we need a different communication to do that. And these are sort of reasons why this sort of shift in a company values or mission can become a reason for a rebrand. Do you have anything to add to that one?
Only to mention that this happens also on a personal brand level. And more today, personal brands stand behind business brands, and we are more curious about who is running this company or who is behind the company. And that's where personal brands absolutely reflect and align or break with the values and the mission that the company set out to do, which may or may not be what it did back in the day when it started. So everything else that you've mentioned there, Chris, is absolutely on point. I will not touch that.
Cool. Yeah. So the next thing is globalization or entering new markets. So if your brand is expanding internationally or targeting new geographic markets, a rebrand can help you adapt to that identity, to its local cultures, and maybe its presence. Again, this is something that not everybody wakes up every morning and does, but with the world being the world it is today, you may have started your little online shop and you localize it to your area, and you may be based in a certain country where everything you did was really relevant, but you seem to be attracting overseas audiences, and a market appears where you could sell. And I've got a client where they've done this and gone to the UK, and they did have to adapt a few things because there were new laws, new regulations. There was existing brands that were using certain elements of what they had, so they had to adapt what they had to be more relevant to the local market and avoid that confusion. But it is becoming something that's becoming more and more popular amongst rebranding reasons because of the way that the internet is these days, and allows us to, you can't take over the world in one day. It's something that happens. I mean, we do get lucky sometimes, a viral video or something goes viral for you and you do get that, but it's far and few between when that happens. And even if that does happen, it's usually a flash in the pan thing where you're famous for 15 minutes and tomorrow we've moved on, we've got the new thing. So, yeah. So
absolutely. It's very interesting because with this particular point, because I'm very connected to sports, specifically NBA basketball, I can recall a very, very clear point in time where NBA is very US focused, very American branded, very flashy in all its presence. And the teams have always played by that rule up until the liberalization and entry of international players started happening. Now, everybody will remember that Yao Ming, one of China's biggest generational talents, probably the biggest, was drafted into the NBA. This year about this time marked the rebrand of the team he came to play for. And I noticed that back at the time, and in discussion with my friends who love basketball, very few had that perception. They didn't really look at the fact that Yao Ming, who was coming in to create and set out a new dynasty, we're talking years of play, prompted a change in how the Houston Rockets positioned themselves in such a way that what had been a rocket or and a basketball up to that point all of a sudden turned into a very Asian looking, particularly Chinese typography approach, and the simplification of their palette, which was very flashy, very all over the place, very contrasty, to two colors, which was the red, interestingly enough, close to the Chinese flag, and the white. Now, I'm not saying this was the only reason, but the fact that it happened when this huge talent was drafted into the league and opened up a door for more Chinese people to come into the NBA through the Houston Rockets, because there was probably a connection there. Today, that is definitely the case. There is a standing, ongoing relationship between the Houston Rockets and teams in the Chinese league. Many Chinese players after Yao Ming came through that franchise into the league and started building their presence. But the Houston Rockets, making the complete conclusion to this long-winded thought, is that they rebranded to adopt that position in that they had in the league.
Yeah, there you go. So another reason for going down that pathway if you're looking at a globalization or entering new markets. Another common one is if you are stagnant in your brand awareness. So if your brand isn't top of mind with consumers or struggling with recognition, potentially a rebrand can help you increase that visibility and recall. This probably reverts back to what I was touching on at the very beginning, where you may have just started your business, you grabbed the first logo that came into your view, whether it was your neighbor, your Fiverr account, whatever it was you got going, and you've gone as far as you can go. And it's sort of you're finding that phone's not ringing, you're not getting the website inquiries you used to get. There's all sorts of reasons why it stops. But if you change your visual identity or your way you communicate, or you change your brand secondary elements, whatever it is, and part of your rebrand exercise, it just makes strike up people's opinions on you, change their opinions, or it might even just spark their interest of, I'd forgotten about those guys. Geez, they're looking blah, whatever blah is, and I might check out their website, or maybe give them a call, or all those things. And so it just sparks up new interest in what you're doing. So it's not something I think you do every 5 minutes. It's not something you wake up and do every daily, but it is something that you need to look at regularly. So,
like you said, Chris, this is not something you're meant to do every 5 minutes. But with this particular point, I want to bring up one of the most current mistakes with apparent rebrands. Doing a rebrand at the skin level without fully understanding and fleshing out the reasons why, at deep in the core of the organization, this rebrand needs to happen, or failing to comprehend and validate those assumptions, will lead into an exercise of graphical character. Not the typical exercise you want to undertake, because it will cost you many, probably thousands, if not dozens of thousands of dollars to replace your current imagery, and then make sure that all the touch points you've had thus far are going to reflect that change. If you're going to rebrand or revamp or refresh, which are slightly different sub-specializations of a rebrand effort, you need to make sure you don't just do it at the skin level, but understand that there is a reason why red doesn't speak to your audience anymore, or why you need to adopt a more varied palette of colors, or speak in a softer tone, or leave behind the mark that had been symbolizing your presence up to this point. It is very, very important that you know the reasons why, and then go about replacing your current touch points, because like I said, this can be costly, disconnecting, and eventually critical to your business.
Yeah, exactly. So the next reason, and I have had some horror stories around this one, where it's a legal or trademark issue. So if your currently brand infringes an existing trademark or legal issue arises, a rebrand may be a strategic solution. So again, it is common that a small business that is in a certain either country or state or town, their business grows. And so when they were small, nobody noticed them. As soon as they became big, and I guess one example of this, and it's a crazy one, is the Katy Perry fashion brand in here in Australia. I don't know whether you're aware of this, Sim, but there's a woman who started a fashion label called Katy Perry. It's her name. But there is obviously a singer in the world that's called Katy Perry, who's an international star, who also has her own fame from the fashion that she wears, and they are currently fighting it out. Now, what's happened recently is that person, that Katy Perry locally won the first legal battle. But now the other one, because they've got more money and more reason to lose their brand, they've now contested the outcome and are fighting it again. So sometimes it might be easier. Now, I think it's harder when it's your name. You can't change your name. But if it's something like that, then you may have to just explore that. And that's the things you need to look at, is if someone comes at you legally, is it worth the fight? Or is it just easier to change your brand's business name, the visual identity, the way you go about your business, just so that you avoid that. So it's not as common, but it does happen a lot. I have had so many horror stories where people have spent tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars on their brand, because once you go down this branding pathway, it's on your trucks, your stationery, your clothing, all these things. And then to find out after all of that, you have to change it. It can be a costly thing. But as I said, it may be the best thing to do is do a rebrand, because the cost of throwing out all those items leads to saving money. Now, loss of relevance is another one. So if your brand feels disconnected from the current trend and the taste of your industry or target audience, a rebrand can revitalize your image and regain confidence. I touched on this earlier with technology. A lot of technology companies are the most common rebranders in the industry, because of when they started their business, what they did was maybe relevant to that. And I guess if you look at even Apple, who is one of the most famous and iconic brands in the world, they have gradually updated their logo over years with the Apple. And I mean, even they got it wrong at the very beginning. With their first logo, it wasn't even a logo, it was an image. It was like,
an illustration.
An illustration, basically, yeah. So, which these days wouldn't work so well on all phones or digital aspects, or even social media.
Absolutely not. If we try to include the tree, the background, the apple, and the person under the tree in that engraving lithographical style in a 16-pixel square, probably it would not be fully read, whereas the apple symbol that today we've grown so accustomed to reads perfectly at every scale that we put it at.
And also the fact that it doesn't resonate with the values and the brand that it is today. So
absolutely,
it really emphasizes basically every point we've raised to right now. So one of the final topics we're going to talk about here is internal motivation and morale. Sometimes a rebrand can be an internal initiative to boost employees' morale and create excitement within the company about the brand's future. Something that's overlooked a lot, but we have touched on this in many companies that you've worked with in the past and things like that, where doing these things changed the culture in the brand internally, which led to then external changes in the brand, because of the way that they communicated internally led to how they communicated externally, which attracted either more business or new business in whatever industry they were targeting at that time. So
absolutely. These branding efforts are, like we keep saying every now and then, they're not just outwardly, they're not an exercise for the world, and it's a display that works outside of ourselves, our skin, our being us, the brand. It is first and foremost an inward change that reflects outside, has a consequence. So when the value or the values that guide the everyday actions, when the mission is not clear to the staff, when there is a breakdown in communication internally, when there is a confusion about what to do as a company, as individuals and units of or departments inside that company, is where a rebrand comes and cleans that up. And sometimes it does take months and moreover years. The fact that a properly done rebrand can absolutely revitalize and clean up staff or talent, as we like to call it, this effort inevitably produces the consequence of outwardly reflecting that new spark of life. This is where we highly encourage you to make sure that you consider all stakeholders and people of importance in your rebrand or your company before we talk about rebrand. And if that is not working at that level, you probably need to do something about it. And it may result in the rebrand, or it may just need to be an internal initiative. It could be getting people out more. It could be having an open discussion about what everybody thinks, where the company is going, how they feel, what their position is. Is it clear to them or not? Are they gelling with the team members they have to work on a daily basis? So these efforts, they take time, and they can be quite messy, but it is also why consulting with experts will produce the best results, because it's hard to gain perspective of self. That's point number one. Point number two is that you lack the impartial position that a third party coming in that's hired to do this cleanup work will be able to do. And that's what branding from the inside out truly means. It's not just changing the skin and the looks and remaining the same on the inside. You need to change your core to make sure that the outside reflects that new life.
Yeah. And that does bring the conclusion to the key steps that we think you need to consider. There are many, many more that could be talked about, and we'd love you to give your feedback. If you have any other ideas, please make comments and reach out to us and let us know what we may have missed. We're more than happy to re-explore this topic again. But what I would love to do right now is talk about some great examples of this being done. And one of them was in the mid-2000s, the Old Spice reinvented itself with the humorous irreverent marketing campaign, which was aimed at a younger audience. The Old Spice commercials and the social media engagement helped reposition the brand as more relevant, cool, leading to increased sales and brand awareness. This probably is a great example because I remember as a kid the little white bottle, and my dad and my grandpa were using it. So as a kid, you're growing up and you're just going, yeah, that smell, right? Yeah.
It's definitely not for me. I used to think, and it's funny that you're mentioning this brand and speaking in the same way that I felt it back then, because every time the commercial came on TV, that epic music, that classical piece just reinforced the disconnection that I felt at the time as a youngster, whereas today they completely rejigged their entire position. And now it aims successfiply to speak at a much wider audience. And it's not just for the old farts anymore. It's actually for the people who are very hip and active. And Old Spice is a fantastic example of repositioning and rejigging their entire message.
Yeah, so rebranding for them really, really did work to keep it relevant. And another example is Nike, who were originally known as the Blue Ribbon Sports. So Nike underwent the rebrand in 1971 and adopted the name Nike after the Greek goddess of victory. The iconic swoosh logo was also introduced in this time. So that rebranding emphasized the focus on performance, innovation, and helping them become one of the leading sportswear brands globally. And I think that is something that has a great success story as of why rebrand, because I don't think Blue Ribbon Sports rolls off the tongue. And to be honest, because I'm a fan of Blue Ribbon ice cream, it sort of, for me, always reminds me of the ice cream, not the scenario here where it's all about sports. And I think even right now, Blue Ribbon would not be a brand that would kind of resonate very well with the current climate of everyone has to, participation awards.
Yes. The culture of the eighth place award. Yes.
Yeah, exactly right. So it would have eventually caught up with Nike if they hadn't gone down that pathway.
Yeah.
Another more recent one is Starbucks, who underwent a significant rebrand in 2011. So they dropped the word coffee from their logo and brought their iconic mermaid to the forefront. This streamlined the more refined design representing Starbucks, brought a focus on beverages rather than just coffee, and the expansion into the global market. So this, again, is a great example of a brand that understood that the word coffee in their name was restricting them growing.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
they kept their, they were clever enough to understand that the mermaid was still something that would resonate with people, and the Starbucks was on its own strong enough to facilitate where they were going as a bigger brand.
Well, this is a very good reflection of points number 5 and number 8. So point number 5 being expanding products or services, and 8, globalization and entering new markets. So everybody knows that Starbucks is an American company or an American brand, but you can find Starbucks pretty much in any capital of the world these days. That meant they had to rethink, even if that rethinking their position simplistically produce an outcome, and that was, 1, reducing the coffee word from their logo, and 2, simplifying their logo to encompass the ability to provide a wider range of services, not just coffee. You don't go to Starbucks for coffee. In fact, coffee is probably the least attractive of their offerings for those that truly love good coffee. And it has nothing to do with coffee that is being served where the brand is present these days. We're talking about Southern Europe countries. The culture of coffee is very different than the full cup of coffee, yet it doesn't refrain them from speaking to the existing connection with the audiences that they have in those countries. And having lived in Barcelona for so long, I do remember a few times that I relished my moments of going into a Starbucks, having a piece of cake, or probably a cheesecake at the time, and having something with it while I sat down with my laptop and felt like a techie, advanced person for the time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A lesser known one, maybe the 2012 Microsoft launched a complete overhaul of its visual identity. So it changed its logo for the first time in 25 years. They did this for a similar reason to the Starbucks. The new logo featured a simplified multicolor square representing the company's diverse products and services. But what it also did was it allowed them to rebrand a signal shift towards the more unified and innovative image as they ventured into new technology markets. So again, we talked about when technology is changing, evolving. In this case, the simplicity of that logo meant that that logo could be used in much more I guess, diverse places than the previous logo, which worked really well as a badge on the front of a computer and maybe on the front of some packaging. But once it had to adapt to different, I guess, technologies, that logo didn't transfer very well. And also, it meant that it gave them an opportunity, and this is what we've talked about, what rebranding really does, is to communicate differently to a new market in a new way. And so it created a new opportunity for them to go through that process. Do you have anything else to say on Microsoft? Or no? Cool.
No, that's pretty much it.
Yep. So Uber rebranded. Now these guys are new. They've only been around for less than a decade,
Yes.
but they rebranded in 2016 because what they were aiming at is evolving the image from a mere transport service to a platform for mobility and logistics. So they moved from a black and white U to be more colorful and geometric in their design. The rebrand represented the global expansion and the diversification into various transport options. So again, they identified why they had to do the rebrand and what it was going to achieve by doing it. And again, they've successfully gone about that. Whether we love the logo, hate the logo, that's not really what this conversation is about. It's the fact that they knew why they were doing the rebrand and what the outcomes were going to be by doing it. This one is probably less about the logo, but more about what they do on a regular basis. So Coca-Cola's script logo has remained largely consistent over the years. So they haven't changed that icon. What they've effectively done is adapt the branding to resonate with the different cultures and occasions. So what they do is through localized campaigns and limited edition packaging or consistent engages the audience remains kind of a globally recognized brand. So this is an example where the logo, the icon, the red and the white, is something that they don't need to change. What they do change is how the underlining elements of the brand change. So it gets a bit deeper into what branding is. And as I said, most people think the logo is your brand. It's not. It's a great start, but it's definitely not the end game for what your brand is all about. And Coca-Cola, whether you love drinking Coca-Cola or not, you do know when they've launched a new campaign, even though it's the same Coca-Cola, the same product, you go, oh, they've got a new prettier woman dancing on the beach, or they've got new younger funkier looking people that are dancing around a barbecue. Like there's just it makes you feel like the brand is different and new, even though it's the same. It hasn't changed. But they've given that perception in your mind that all of a sudden something's new about Coca-Cola.
And you're constantly reminded of how refreshing it can be, and you're jolted back into that feeling of feeling the bubbles go through with the freshness, and I need to get one Coca-Cola right now.
Yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah. So this is, but by the way, it's not an advertisement for Coca-Cola. It's just something that is a good example of how they go about branding. So, so there you go. I guess that brings us to the conclusion of today. So what we want you to remember is a brand should not be taken lightly. It involves thoughtful planning, research, and deep understanding of your brand's identity, target audience, and the market dynamics. So if you're considering a rebrand, consult with a branding expert like us. We'd love to have a chat with you about applying our P8 program and the framework to ensure the process is well executed and aligns with your business goals. Many brands have successfully executed rebranding initiatives to stay relevant, reach new audiences, and adapt a changing market condition. So we've cracked a whole new high. We've hit 50 odd minutes, Sim.
Incredible.
So we're better and better at this.
Keep going strong.
But this was a really broad stroke
topic,
where there's lots and lots of meaty bits on the bone, and we probably will have to revisit this one because there's not just rebrand, there's another little aspect of this called refreshing, which is a whole new topic that we can look at, which I think we touched on with Coca-Cola right there in the end. So
we did.
I guess thanks everyone for attending this week. I will sign off and say thank you for joining us on this episode of Amplify Your Brand, and I will hand it over to Sim for our sign off and let him do his thing.
As usual, I love knowing where you guys are watching this from and what platform you're on. Let us know the country and the platform that you're seeing this from, and looking forward to seeing you on the next one
of Amplify Your Brand. Take care, guys.